of Ghana. Welcome, Professor Zeleza, to present your book.
Thank you very much, Godwin, for those wonderful introductory remarks, and Ruthie, Professor Rono, thank you very much for that lovely introduction. I would like to begin by welcoming all the participants to this book launch. I truly appreciate your presence wherever you are. I'm delighted that the participants come from dozens of countries. Please allow me to begin my brief remarks by expressing my deepest gratitude to the following organizations and people. My publisher, CODESRIA, for the opportunity to publish this book with them. CODESRIA is the most important social science network in Africa and one of the leading social science networks in the world. Since its establishment in 1973, and especially in the 1980s and 1990s, when African universities and intellectual communities were under the assault of structural adjustment programs imposed by the international financial institutions and authoritarian post-colonial states, CODESRIA, for my generation, became an invaluable space of unfettered, robust African knowledge production. And I see a lot of my colleagues from those days. I last published with CODESRIA in 2008 with a 2-volume book, The Study of Africa. And I'm really delighted to publish with CODESRIA again. Secondly, I want to thank my institution, USIU-Africa, and all my colleagues, including Professor Ruthie Rono, who until 2 months ago was our DVC for academic and student affairs. And she and I worked very closely as administrators at this wonderful university. I also wish to thank Dr. Kevin Desai, the chair of our Board of Trustees, who is the permanent secretary in the Ministry for East African Community, Government of Kenya, and he'll be giving the closing remarks. And also at USIU, I'm grateful for our marketing and communications team, led by Ms. Irene Onacha, that worked seamlessly with colleagues at CODESRIA to put the launch together. And then thirdly, I wish to thank the 4 friends who wrote endorsements for the book. 2 of them are with us this afternoon. One of the authors of the endorsement was Professor Henry Louis Gates, the Alphonse Fletcher University professor at Harvard University. The other is Professor Alondra Nelson, the Harold F. Linder Professor at the Institute for Advanced Study and President of the Social Science Research Council, who currently serves as Deputy Director for Science and Society for the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. She was appointed by the Biden administration a few weeks ago. And then we have Professor Fumi Olanisekan, Vice President and Vice Principal International, Professor of Security, Leadership and Development, King's College London, and you'll be able to hear from her. And Professor Tawana Kupe, Principal and Vice Chancellor, University of Pretoria, who also you'll be hearing from. Fourthly, I want to give special thanks to my friends who kindly agreed to join the launch and make comments. All of them are very dear to me, and I'm a great admirer of their academic work, their role as public intellectuals and scholar activists. They will all be introduced shortly by the moderator. With some of them, like Sir Hilary Bekos, the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, we go back 4 decades. He and I joined the history department at the University of the West Indies as young lecturers in our mid-20s in 1982. So it's about 40 years ago. I feel deeply indebted, fifthly, to the various outlets where some of the essays were first presented and posted, and my network of friends and intellectual collaborators who read and commented on the essays in their draft form. Please allow me to single out my life partner, Cassandra Rachel Vinnie. She is, to quote Toni Morrison, a friend of my mind, as I am a friend of her mind. She's always the first person to read anything I write before it leaves our intimate and exclusive conversations and enters the public realm. 6, I want to appreciate all the participants, including numerous friends and colleagues in various institutions and networks that I've been associated with since the 1970s. Among them is Professor Toyin Falola, the illustrious and prodigious scholar based at the University of Texas, Austin, with who I recently conducted a 25,000-word interview of my personal and professional journey. Another is Chikosa Silungwe, the Attorney General of the new government in Malawi, installed after mass struggles by Malawians against the rigged elections of May 2019. Malawi became the second country after Kenya where the presidential election was annulled by the Supreme Court, and the first where the opposition proceeded to win the re-election. A special shout to members of my family, including my lovely daughter, Natasha Tandile. In the remaining minutes, let me say a few words about the book by reading a few paragraphs from the preface and summarizing the 5 sections of the book. I write this preface in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic and lockdowns in many countries around the world, including Kenya, where I currently live. A major crisis not only hugely disruptive, it always holds a giant mirror to society, and in this case, to the world at large, exposing its underlying structural deformities and dysfunctions. The coronavirus pandemic offers a stark reflection of national and global political economies in disarray and the colossal underinvestments in the economic and social well-being of the masses of working people, engendering the multiple crises brutally pried open by the pandemic, where the austerities, inequalities, and ideological inanities of neoliberal globalization, retrogressive populisms, and wanton assaults on nature and the environment. The essays in this volume seek to make sense of the various disruptions and dysfunctions of the early 21st century for Africa, of which the coronavirus pandemic is sadly symptomatic. They were written from 2 locations, namely the United States, where I lived for more than 2 decades, and Kenya, where I moved to take up a new position in January 2016. Thus, they reflect discourses from mutually reinforcing spatial temporal positions in North America and Africa, the global North and the global South, the African continent and the diaspora. As such, the essays combine observations and analysis of developments in these spaces that particularly intrigued me or struck me as significant. In short, they represent my personal meditations as an engaged Pan-African scholar and global citizen on key developments during the 2nd decade and beginning of the 3rd decade of the 21st century. The book is divided into 5 parts, and of course, our commentators will have a chance to elaborate on some of them. The first part deals with what I call America's racial dysfunctions. So it talks about different aspects of the United States, including the police brutality, the attacks on Obama, the tragedy and farce that is Trump's America, and then reckoning with 400 years, the commemoration of the arrival of the first enslaved Africans in Virginia, an event that my wife and I attended. And then it ends with the American uprising of 2020, the Black Lives Matter movement. Secondly, it looks at global turbulence, from Brexit, the Western alliance in disarray, the turbulent 2010s, the coronavirus itself, what I call in the essay that deals with that, the political economy of a pathogen, and then the whole issue of how we can mobilize the diaspora for African development. The third section deals with what I call Africa's political dramas, beginning with a long assessment of President Mandela as an activist, as a politician, as a leader, as a Pan-Africanist. Then the Zuma saga and the post-colonial reckoning of South Africa, Zimbabwe's political crisis, a tale of failed transitions, Kenya's election watershed and the promise of African democracy. And that section ends with Malawi's political earthquake. The fourth part deals with a perennial concern of mine, namely how Africa is constructed, how Africa is imagined, how Africa is represented. And in this section, it's entitled Africa's Persistent Mythologization. And it looks at how Africa was perceived during the Ebola crisis several years ago. And then it moves to how Trump tried to homogenize and dehumanize the continent with his famous statement. And it looks at Black Panther, the movie. While of course it was very popular, I think it's kind of reprises a colonial gaze of some time. And then it looks at the very important question, how do we decolonize African knowledges? And then finally, in that section, reckoning with the past and reimagining the futures of African studies for the 21st century. The final section looks at higher education, which is, of course, something that I've been very interested in as a practitioner, but also as a scholar. I talk about the 6 capacity challenges of African universities, rethinking the value proposition of university education, the challenge of employability for our graduates, Africa internationalization and the global context, the challenges and opportunities of the 4th industrial revolution for African universities, and the financial crisis facing universities from the United States to Kenya and elsewhere. I end the book with, in memory of 2 towering African intellectuals, Ali Mazrui and Tandika Nkandawire, both of whom I had the privilege of knowing. Thank you very much. I look forward to the rest of our engagement this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Professor Zeleza, for your overview of your book. It's quite very